that this is a bizarre thing for Jesus to say in light of what people are expecting. Hello and welcome to the Beginning of Wisdom. I'm Andrew Schumacher. This is part 2, responding to Daniel Joseph's series on why Christians should keep the law. This one in his playlist is titled Not to Destroy But to Fulfill. So obviously talking about Matthew 5:17. Let's jump right in and let's see what he has to say.
Welcome to episode 2 of our series, Why Christians Should Keep the Law. I want to open up today by taking you to one of the most important and significant passages in the Bible in regard to our topic of why Christians should keep the law. This particular passage is embedded in what I would call one of the most iconic and memorable passages in all of Scripture. It's the Sermon on the Mount. And within the Sermon on the Mount, do you know what Jesus talks about? He talks about the law, and he talks about it in the most profound way. And what better way to really build this series than upon the words of Jesus? And this will be instrumental. We are basically building upon what we covered last week. We're laying a solid foundation here. And so in Matthew 5:17, we read this. He says, do not think, me namisete, in the Greek, do not think that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Now I'm going to tell you, this is a loaded statement. There's a lot here to take in. There's a lot to digest. The first thing I want to bring to your attention is this, that this statement in its historical context doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It couldn't be more out of left field, more bizarre. And why do I say that? Well, I say that because of the following. In the first century, the Jewish people were looking for a Messiah that was not only not going to break the law or to destroy the law, they were looking for a Messiah to uphold it and furthermore, teach it, which ironically, literally what Jesus is doing. Their expectation was for the Messiah to do just what Jesus is doing in Matthew 5. Incredible. You can read the prophets. The prophets talk about how for out of Zion shall come forth the Torah, the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And what it says specifically, collaborating with this term, the law, he will teach him, or he will teach them his ways. Specifically identifying the ways of the Lord with the law. And do you understand? This is the expectation of the Messiah that was to come, that he would actually teach the law. He would teach the Torah. Absolutely profound.
I'll point out one thing here. I don't think what he's saying is wrong or anything. I would point out that there's more than one conception of who Jesus or who the Messiah would be that's prevalent at the time of Christ. And so you have some who, he's speaking in Daniel Joseph speaking in a very sort of tame way, I guess you might say, when he's talking about what the Messiah upholding and keeping and teaching the law, as if he's going to be expected to be this peaceful teacher of the law. Rather, what many thought, like the zealots, like Peter, was that his zeal for the law would be such that he would impose it on the people around, that he would the way he would establish it in one way, maybe not impose it on outsiders. I'm not certain of that, but at least establish it to the exclusion of any other laws, and in his day, like Roman law. So the idea of, kicking out other law in place and replacing it with the law of Moses. So he's right that certainly people were expecting Jesus to do those things. We'll come back to it, but I think I've wondered about this myself. He's making a more of a positive statement about it, that this is a bizarre thing for Jesus to say in light of what people are expecting. I've thought a similar thing, that why would Jesus talk about destroying the law or the scriptures or any kind of aspect of that? And if you've seen things I've said about this passage, you might know where my mind is going with it, and we'll talk about that for sure. But I want to focus on what he's saying. If Jesus came, if what the people were expecting of the Messiah was that he would uphold and indeed establish reestablish as a kingdom that keeps the law and that has that God's law from Moses as that kingdom's law. That's what people were expecting, what a lot of people were expecting. This is an odd thing for Jesus to say, isn't it? It's odd to say, hey, don't even think, don't let it enter your mind that I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. What would make them think that he came to do that? Now, this is near the very beginning of his public ministry. It's his first, as far as we can understand, this is his big sort of starting to really teach. And he starts where the Bible starts. He starts with law. He starts with the Torah and all of this. That's not all he's talking about, and we'll get into that. But why would he say, don't let it enter your mind that I came to destroy the law? Well, it's not because of anything that's happened up to this point. It's not because of any expectations about the Messiah. It's because Jesus here is he's introducing his sermon. He's about to give a sermon that is going to spend a lot of time talking about various laws and commandments and things. And he's telling them, hey, as I begin, don't let it enter your mind that I've come to destroy the law or the prophets. He's not saying this because, and it's for a person who studies the Bible a lot and thinks about, what is the prior context of something. It's less common for us to think of someone giving an introduction to what they're about to say in this sort of way. We think of them saying something that has a prior context, and it somewhat does, but not in the way that we're often taught to think. We're often taught to think, well, here was the cultural context. In response to that cultural context, Jesus or Paul or whoever is saying X, Y, Z. But that's not really what's happening here. Now, we'll see what Daniel Joseph thinks is going on. But I think he's absolutely right that this is an odd thing for Jesus to say, given what people were expecting of the Messiah. It doesn't fit that expectation. But what he's doing is he's saying, I'm gonna say a lot of stuff. Don't think that what I'm saying means that I'm destroying the law or the prophets. I think that's what it's getting at. We'll see what Daniel Joseph thinks if he gives us a specific thing.
Why, pray tell, is Jesus coming on the scene and saying something that they would never expect to see? This particular group that is involved here, these are his disciples. They believe he is the Messiah. Why is he saying this? I'm going to tell you exactly why he is saying this. It is prophecy. This is a prophetic warning. Jesus knew exactly what men would do to his law in his name. He knew. And, if there was any question as to the validity of what that how necessary this prophecy is and this prophetic warning is, and how it was a legitimate warning?
So Jesus is prophesying about us, about Christians who are going to come and think that he came to destroy the law. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll save most of what I have to say till the end, but yeah, now I understand what he's getting at. So it wasn't really for them, is what Daniel Joseph is saying here. What Jesus is saying in verse 17 to his hearers, it really has nothing to do with them. It has to do with what's going to happen, hundreds and thousand, plus years later. Those types of people, he's speaking, only out into the distant future. This actually has no first century application. So that's what he's saying.
Just look around you today in the church. Look at what is happening. Look at the belief and the ideology of professing Christians in regard to the law of God. And consider well, oh my goodness, God help us. The enemy has breached the walls of the church. Absolutely incredible. If there was any generation that ever needed to heed these words, it is this generation we're living in. Let me highlight this at the end. He says, I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Plerao, or the inflected is plerosai. He came to fulfill. So he starts off by saying, you know what, me nami sete, don't you dare think, not for a moment, don't even ponder, don't even contemplate the idea that my mission was to come and destroy the law, to do away with the law. Do not do that. Don't go there. What you are to understand is he came to plerao or plerosai. He came to fulfill. Fulfill this plerao in Jesus' own context, in his own teaching, is a direct contradiction to that of destruction, which leads us to the question, what is he talking about in regard to fulfilling? Well, firstly, we can safely say with no reservation, we're talking about messianic prophecy here, right? And this term is used specifically in the New Testament in that context over and over again.
He is absolutely right about that. Over and over again, every use in Matthew up to this point has been, this happens so as to fulfill what was said in Isaiah or wherever, what was written, and then cites an Old Testament text. So every time, yes, he's absolutely right. Fulfill has to do with Old Testament prophecy. We'll see what else he says, but so far, I'm not disappointed that Daniel Joseph has given us his understanding of these terms is far superior to what I've seen from most people in the Torah movements. Most of them will find some wild other context and try to import some other meaning into fulfill besides the fulfillment of prophecy. And he hasn't done that. He's seen exactly what it is pointing to. Now, we'll see how he interprets that. But as far as the biblical data and understanding words in their context, this is far better than most of what I've seen in the Torah movement. So bravo on that.
And all you need to do, again, go back to the Torah, the law, go back to the prophets. All these prophecies, whether I'm talking about Genesis 22, whether I'm talking about Psalm 22, whether I'm talking about Zechariah 12, whether I'm talking about Isaiah 53, whatever the case may be, Jesus came to fulfill those prophecies, to accomplish them. And not just that, but also these prophetic typologies. There's a saying in traditional Judaism, the Ma'aseh Avot Siman Lebanim, the deeds of the fathers are a sign for the children. The things that happened before will happen again, and ultimately with the Messiah. Just as Israel would end up going to Egypt, what happened to the Messiah? Jesus, when he came, when the word became flesh, was taken into Egypt. It's absolutely incredible. And we could go down there. We're not going to do that today. But it just goes to show that we understand that this is what is being referred to as fulfill. But that's not it. There's more that he came to fulfill. For the first time in human history, we've got to see what it looked like for a human being to actually fulfill the law and to do it perfectly, without infraction, without sin. We are told he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. The writer of Hebrews says he was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin.
I'll point out I agree with this as well. I think that it's, and when he says the law or the prophets, he's being all inclusive. So when he says he came to fulfill and fulfill all that the scriptures say, it's prophetic, but it's prophetic in multiple ways. It's not just that a prophet said this would happen and this would be true of the Messiah, and lo and behold, it is. It's also there were commandments that were typological of the Messiah and would point to him typologically, and he came to fulfill those. Now, what I want to say here, because I don't want to forget it, is, one example of that is I think a little bit problematic in Torah observance. Not that I've heard anyone say anything specifically about this, so maybe they have a thought or an answer in response. But the fact that when Jesus touched or was touched by those who were ceremonially unclean, whether the woman with the issue of blood or lepers or all these folks that had some issue in which they were considered unclean. The Torah says, specifically about those types of uncleanness, that if they sit on something, it becomes unclean. If they touch something, it becomes unclean. If they touch a person, that person becomes unclean. And it's not, like a permanent situation for the one who's touched. They wash and they're unclean until evening is what it often says. So the uncleanness, the point I'm making is the uncleanness passes from the unclean to the clean and renders the one who's clean unclean. And the Torah says this is what's happening. So this is what you're to do when that occurs. That is not what Jesus did. When Jesus came in contact with the unclean, he made them clean. He made the lepers healed and thus clean. He made the woman with the blood healed and thus clean. He made them clean. He didn't become unclean. And on one level, that's just, it's the power of God, and he's the Messiah, he's the God-man, all this stuff we could say about it. But what we're not saying is, why didn't Jesus do because the fact is, ceremonial uncleanness is not something that is, the remedy is a point of law. It's a point of obedience to go, and when the law says you've become unclean, you must wash yourself and be unclean until evening. And then when evening comes, you're clean again. And it's a ritualistic thing. It's not like someone could come up to you and see the uncleanness on you just because, if you touch the shoulder of a leper and that leper, but you didn't contract leprosy, but you were still considered unclean. It's not that you would, that someone could come up to you who didn't know that happened and just tell that you're unclean. It was a point of obedience that you must go wash and go through the ritual to become clean again. And we have no record Jesus ever did this. And from what the text does say, it shows that actually what happened is they didn't pass their uncleanness to him. He passed cleanness to them. The opposite of what the Torah says is what happened. And this is how he fulfilled those cleanliness laws, by reversing the process of things becoming unclean by his power as the Son of God. And so, yeah, that fulfillment, I agree with Daniel Joseph, that fulfillment comes in many forms. But sometimes, because he's Jesus, there's a Torah command that doesn't exactly get done to the letter because the situation didn't work out the way it normally would. So I think that's really interesting. But yeah, let's let him continue.
And so it's not simply a statement that, hey, he came and fulfilled messianic prophecies. Those prophecies would have never been fulfilled had he not fulfilled righteousness, had he not been, as Peter calls, the pure and spotless lamb. He was without spot and blemish. And so,
Indeed, Jesus, he is the one. Scripture is, you could say, is a story of all of the ways that men fail to be righteous before God. And it incorporates things regarding the law of Moses, but it's so many other things. Every king, the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah, even the good kings, we finding them failure in Adam and Noah and Moses and all of these great leaders and great men of God who were called by God and used by God in powerful ways. They all have failures in them. And so over and over, the Bible screams at us, you can't do it. You absolutely can't do it. But the promise God made was there would be a man who will. And that man wouldn't be, he would be one of us, but he would also be not of this world. And the fact that every single one of us fails is proof that it had to be someone not of this world. And so we have Christ, and he came and he did it. But he more than did it. It wasn't just that he came and lived properly according to the law. It was that he came and lived in such a way as to be elevated, to go beyond, what the law said. He never became unclean. He cleansed those he touched. Anyway, we'll let him finish up. There's just a couple more minutes.
I'm really emphasizing this point of what it means to fulfill, because today there are many Christians who interpret plerao, this aspect to fulfill, as, wait a second, Jesus fulfilled it, so then it's done away with. Now you see how insane that is, right? We're not even talking about two different passages in two different books. We are talking about the same verse. What literally begins with, don't even go there thinking that my mission was to come and destroy the law. And what's absolutely astonishing is by the time you get to the end of the verse and people read that Jesus came and fulfilled it, they literally come to the conclusion that Jesus said, don't do it. I mean, you cannot make that stuff up. Did
you hear what he said there? This is a common error among Torah observance folks, is that they think that when Christians say that a certain commandment is no longer obligatory or something like that, that it means don't do it. And you heard him say it right there, that Jesus, instead of Jesus saying he came to fulfill it, he's saying don't do it. Again, Christians don't say that. Not that no Christian ever has. I know, yeah, there have been those that do. But those who've actually studied these things know, no, it's not that he said that not to do it. It's that he, that he fulfilled it, and things, things can come to their intended conclusion, and that's not the same thing as being destroyed, as he's talking about. So we'll kind of go over that stuff when we get to the end here.
To the conclusion, oh, because he fulfilled it, well, now we don't have to. Because he fulfilled it, now the law is done away with. Oh my goodness. This is how we know there are demonic spirits and principalities and powers, spiritual host of wickedness, involved in attacking the gospel, even specifically Jesus' own teachings. And they're so convincing and sophisticated that they can turn the literal same verse up on its head, remove the entire meaning out, and redefine what it means for Christ to fulfill. That,
I don't know what to say about that. I guess if you're really passionate about your theology, then you can think that those who disagree with it are demonic. But that's it's at least kind of consistent if that's what you believe.
is an incredible thing. That to the end of my life, I will not stop being stupefied that this is able to happen. Now, that said, I want to push forward. Let's get a little more context. Jesus is going to double down on this statement that he just made, that don't you dare think that my mission is to destroy the law, to do away with the law. That's not why I came. I came to do the contrary. I actually came to fill up, to play ra'o, to fulfill it, to walk it out. That's all we have time for today. Look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Lord bless you.
All right. So let's kind of review. So what kind of argument is he making here? He's making a positive argument, a positive biblical argument for his position. He's looking at the text and he's saying, this text proves my position. So if he's right, then Torah observance theology is right. He talks a little bit here and there about, his theological opponents and what they might say, and how he just can't understand it. But that's essentially what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an argument for Torah observance based on what's found here in Matthew 5:17. And it's a common one. It's very common. And it's also very common what he said there at the end, that it's just, it couldn't possibly, mean, anything like bringing it to an end or something like that for fulfill, because of what he just said. Don't think I came to destroy. So let me give you a couple things to help you understand what's going on here. First, let's talk about the words, the terms. He gave us the Greek plerao. He didn't give us the Greek for destroy, which I find somewhat interesting, because it's more clear. It helps us bring clarity to this text, and not in a way that favors Torah observance. So the term for destroy is kataluo, and the word for fulfill is plerao. So how do these terms potentially relate to one another? So kataluo, the most clear definition is just what you see translated, the term destroy. But it, in its usages, it pretty much carries this idea of to overthrow or destroy. It's an antagonistic term. It's a term, don't think that I came to come against and conquer and overthrow and destroy the scriptures, the law and the prophets. I did not come to do that, but to fulfill. Now, plerao, what does that mean? What are the meanings it can have? So it can have, you said, fill up, or, do in its fullness. And that there are texts where that works. That's not what we have here in the context of Matthew, though. In the context of Matthew, up to this point, it's been to fulfill, as in terms of prophecy. And the term does at times carry meanings related to something coming to an end or being complete. There's a passage in Luke, and I can't remember the exact one right off the top of my head right now, and I'm trying to do this video without a bunch of edits of me looking stuff up. We'll see. Maybe in the future I'll actually bring up scriptures and we'll dive in a little more deeply. But in Luke, it's a very sort of mundane passage. It's not something that's full of a whole bunch of theological meaning, but the term gets used, and it just in the text it's saying that, once their time was complete there, or once they were finished there, then they went on to another city or something like that. It just meant their time completed, it finished, and that's the term plerao. So the term does have the ability to carry a meaning involving the end of something. So in terms of just the words themselves, kataluo and plerao, destroy or complete. If we want to, both of those have possible meanings that mean to bring something to an end. One of them is antagonistic, and one of them is positive and is harmonious, and says, bringing something to its intended completeness or finishing. So if we're just looking at the words, I think that if Jesus, and I do think there's some, Daniel Joseph said, and I can go along with it, that there's more to it than just one simple layer of meaning, that it's not just about fulfilling prophecy. When Jesus says the law and the prophets, he's talking about all of it, and we can kind of look at it from multiple angles, that it's not just the foretellings of the prophets, but also the events in the lives of the patriarchs that are types of Christ, and then the commandments within the Torah that are types of Christ in one way or another. So all of that is sort of on the table. And I think because all of that's on the table, so are all of the possible meanings for these terms. I think that destroy and complete are perfect. Complete is a perfect word for fulfilling prophecy too. He completed that which was said in the scriptures, right? And it's something that can be applied to aspects of the law. So there's nothing in the text, in the grammar, in the meanings of these words that tells us that Daniel Joseph has to be right. So that's sort of a weakness. We talk about strengths and weaknesses of his argument. The strengths are, he's saying things that you can get from the text. The problem is when you're making a positive case aimed at one particular conclusion, you have to rule out the other conclusions, and that's something that he doesn't do. He never rules out except by means of really just fallaciously arguing that Christians think that fulfill means the exact same thing as destroy. That is the common argument from Torah Observance folks, is that it just means, Christians are just saying it means what Jesus said it didn't mean. But that's not true. And here's the other thing, and this is kind of where my big point I want to make around this passage, and we're going to see this as we go on. I don't even really need fulfill to mean complete for what I think is going on in this passage to be true. It could literally just mean like fulfilling prophecy, which he acknowledges is a meaning that's there in the text, and that is one thing that it means. I could say that's basically what it means. And the reason I can say that is that Jesus is talking about the law and the prophets. And anytime you see those terms together in the New Testament, it's a reference to the whole Old Testament. It's not a reference to just the 5 books of Moses, even less a reference to just the commandments God gave Moses at Sinai. That's, when you see law and prophets together like that, that should mean in your head is, Law, like the books of Moses, prophets, like the rest of it, all put together, it's the whole scriptures. Jesus is talking about he didn't come to destroy the Bible. That's what he's saying. He's not saying I didn't come to, render, to nullify or render in, no longer binding commandments in the Torah. That's not even what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about the whole Bible and that he didn't come to overthrow it, but rather to fulfill it. And when you see that and you realize, he's not talking, commandments of the Torah isn't even the main thing he's talking about. He's going to kind of get there, but the reason he's saying it this way is he's talking about all the Bible, and he's talking about, here, I want you to understand my relationship with the scriptures. I came to fulfill them. That's the main point of Matthew 17 or 5:17. And as I said before, it's introductory. The reason it's a little odd for him to say this stuff about the Bible when there seems to be no prior idea that the Messiah would ever be against the scriptures in the first place. Like, why would people let it come into their head? It's not because it's for generations and later. The Bible never says that. That is something that Daniel Joseph is inserting into the text as a theory to try to explain why it's there when it doesn't make sense, with his theology. With traditional Christian theology that takes this whole sermon and looks at it as a whole, Jesus is introducing the Sermon on the Mount, in which he's about to say, you've heard it said, but I tell you. And a lot of those are Torah commands that he's talking about. Well, you've heard it said, or you've heard that it was written, but I'm telling you X, Y, Z. And I'm not going to get into all that right now. But just to point out, the reason he's saying don't think I came to destroy the scriptures is because I'm about to say a bunch of stuff that might make you think that I came to destroy the scriptures. He's going to go into a sermon that is going to elevate himself to a level beyond Moses. The Sermon on the Mount really is a new covenant Sinai. But he's not Moses on the mountain, passing along the law given to God. He's God on the mountain. He's Yahweh giving his law and saying, I tell you, speaking on his own authority. So it's a powerful thing that he's about to do, and he's preparing them for what they're about to hear. But he's saying, don't think that I'm not just coming to, you're going to hear me say all this stuff. I'm not coming to change everything up on you. I'm coming to fulfill. Meaning what I'm doing is what is consistent with what the entire Old Testament has said about me, about what I would do. I'm coming to do the proper thing. And that's the main idea there. So I think that when we see that, again, in the context of the proper understanding of the law, are some things going to change? Absolutely. But it's because they are being fulfilled in Christ. So there are changes afoot. All right, so I'm glad we got to take a look at that here, part 2. We'll see you in part 3 whenever that one comes out.